Welcome to our podcast. This is another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego, with video production and studio provided by MaxLux Media, sponsored by Dorada Nutrition, with your host being myself, Steve Wire, a freelance reporter. This podcast is dedicated to fostering quality dialogue surrounding all things local policy related in North County, San Diego. Join us weekly as we interview political leaders, analysts, professionals, and community members on issues ranging from homelessness to housing density to elections. Today I wanted to do a collaborative episode of sorts, and we do this from time to time on the show now, where we bring in people who have other podcasts, similar interests, but in this case we have a particular niche that has to do with crime, and so for that purpose I brought in Angie and Adrain, who run the Where in the World is Crime in San Diego podcast, which is about, about a year old?
It's about to be a year in August.
A year in August? Okay, well, congratulations on reaching that benchmark. But
Thank you.
Basically, I wanted to bring you on because you guys do some pretty interesting stories. You talk about sort of these missing persons cases, disappearing people, murder cases, kidnapping, all sorts of different stuff. And I wanted to sort of tie that into this podcast in terms of, giving you a chance to both talk about some of the more interesting stories that have come up, but also talking about the issue of crime in San Diego at large as a whole. So thanks again for coming on to the show. Really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question I wanted to ask is, so can you sort of explain to people more precisely, like what is sort of the theme of Where in the World is Crime in San Diego? Like what kinds of stories you fixate on? Like what sort of inspired and drives the show, as it were?
I'm a crime junkie. I've listened to every other podcast that's out there, and I love them. The one thing is they're everywhere else in the world. Mm-hmm. They're in Florida, they're in Alaska, they're in the nooks and crannies, and there's very few cases that I would hear that were San Diego-based, and they would traumatize me. Or like, oh, I go to that store, and I shop at this place, and I've been to that school, and I realized that if that's a reaction I'm having, and it helped me be more aware, then if someone else heard the same, they might have that same reaction, where it's no longer something that's happening to someone else, but it's more of a reality that I need to take care of myself. I need to, know how to protect myself. I need to share my location with people. I need to make sure that I know what to do in case of emergency. And our biggest focus is awareness, community support. And also the media tends to have this habit to glamorize the perpetrator all the time. And that just really irks me, because it shouldn't define someone's life, how they went out or how their untimely death happened. So this was a way for us to celebrate the victim and everything that their life was, and not just that one moment that overshadows. Sure.
So more of a victim-focused perspective, as opposed to, well, I feel like, and I've worked on Dateline, for instance, and I've worked for other news outlets, and it does seem like there is a tendency to sort of glamorize the perpetrator, to sort of focus on who is this person, what are they about.
Why did they do it?
Yeah, why did they do it? Yeah, there's people curious. I mean, now in the age of mass shootings, we get, it seems like all these people have a manifesto or something. So it just seems like there is a tendency for the media to fixate on the perpetrator. So sort of that, you wanted to provide a sort of...
a different side of it.
Yeah, a different side of things. Yeah.
Which I do still, I'm the same as everybody else. Why did they do it? I still look at the psychology. I tend to dabble a little bit into the criminal justice system and how the courts play out, because every case is different. But it's also... our biggest focus with any case is, yes, we're going to share this, but we also want to make sure that this person gets their moment.
Sure, absolutely. So you guys, as I mentioned, I've looked at a few episodes, you guys talk about some of these murder stories, some of these kidnappings. Yeah. What other kinds of cases do you run across?
We have a spectrum.
Yeah, there is no real, obviously there's no real shortage necessarily. Once you deep dive into research and you start finding you can type in, say, for instance, murder in San Diego, and a list of stuff is going to show up. And some being very detailed into specifically cases that have shaped our county, and not just our county, but the world. And one of the cases that we've done where we did last month was the school shooting down in San Carlos. And it happened to be really popular because it was the first female school shooter in San Diego history, but also for the U.S. And it's just oh, okay, wow. And then you go dive into that, and you realize someone made a song of that, and you're like, oh, who would make a song out of a massacre or of a tragedy? And it's just wow, And it's just amazing to kind of see how little research you would have to deep dive into something, and it's then you see there's a big giant spectrum. So it's After
rabbit
that,
hole, as we call it.
yeah, the rabbit hole, and then we just really just go like, okay, what is something that sticks out to us, And I mean,
And a lot of these stories, the victims' families tend to either start a 5K or a scholarship, like something positive usually comes out of these when a community comes together. And that's really special because sometimes you'll know about the 5K, but you won't know how it originated.
Sure.
Or you'll hear about the scholarship, but you never knew what was the purpose or how it was started.
Yeah.
So to be able to tie that all together for people is really nice.
Sure.
Yeah, like Chelsea King's, like her tragedy, her tragic death, and also Amber Dubois. What came out of it was, more of these laws that came out with like, sex trafficker.
Sex offenders and how they're registered, how that's monitored and controlled.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of guidelines got a lot tighter. That brought a lot more focus. And as tragic as it is, the fact that their families merged together to push for these things to happen is really inspiring for everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. I'm curious. I mean, obviously, I was talking to you, Adrian, before the show. You said something interesting. You said, like, each of these cases is so unique and so interesting that you cover. But I do want to know, in the, what is it, like 30-some episodes you guys have done?
Yes.
Or so. Are there any sort of patterns, any sort of systematic themes that are emerging in the cases that you cover in terms of every city is different, every community is different, like the face of crime in San Diego, sort of what's tying these cases together? Is there anything like that you're seeing? Anything
off the top of my head, I can't really pinpoint something exactly like, okay, this is why all these are linked. But like I said, everything is different. Every case is, sometimes you look at it, Angie likes to look at the psychological stuff, like what is their back history? What was their upbringing? Mm-hmm. And some of them, it's family issues or upbringing. Like maybe they're in an area where there's like more poverty and there was more crime. And that was just the way that they lived.
I poke at the nature versus nurture idea of like, was it something that they were born with or was it something that they learned along the way? And he focuses on location, like, how available was this crime?
Mm-hmm.
How easy was it for them? Did they have to like pre-plan a lot? Was it premeditated or was it something like just crime of opportunity?
Mm-hmm. So given that you cover the psychological aspect, do you, maybe you can talk about a couple of the interesting psychological cases that have come up so far, like what sort of, as again, sort of pushing for a common thread or a common denominator behind some of these crimes, like maybe a couple cases come to mind.
I think the easy one is always domestic abuse cases. Mm-hmm. And it's mostly with like a certain generation where it was very easy to like brush things under the rug and you don't talk about things, you weren't allowed to like ask for resources, specifically in like our parents' generation. Where in the 80s and 90s, it was, you don't talk about your problems. There was no resources available. So women and some men would put up with a lot of different abuse and they would try to shield their children from it. And it only led to like something much worse at that point.
Sure. So domestic abuse is one. Now, I was also talking with Adrian for the show about, you guys have covered some kidnapping cases.
Yeah.
And Adrian, I mentioned to you that, San Diego, I don't know if I mentioned this, but it's it's on the FBI hotspot list for one of the biggest human trafficking hubs actually in America, and there's around I think between 5,000 and 10,000 victims trafficked a year in San Diego. I think it's 8,000. So basically, have you sort of been running across like these kidnapping cases and linking that back to this more systematic problem of trafficking? Is that something you've delved into at all?
So like I mentioned, we did have an episode regarding sex trafficking, but we also had an interview at the start of the year with a wife who was part of sex trafficking where, she reached out to Angie on social media.
Her husband was a trafficker, so she explained the side of being the family and finding out and how that traumatized them. Mm-hmm. And like the aftermath of picking up behind someone like that. One of the things I think San Diego that's known for is obviously the border and how easy it is to like escape and go to Mexico. So our very first episode was about gringo hunters and this group in Mexico that is solely focused on catching American runaways. So they get a wanted list and they work off of that, and that's their nonstop job. So it's a group of 7 officers, and they just get tips from the U.S. There's no money exchange at any point. They will send weapons to help. They will send additional training. They'll sometimes send rewards, but they don't pay them necessarily.
So their goal is to find people who have run away and prevent them from being trafficked, or what's the...
No, their goal is to catch any American criminal that's ran down to Mexico and get them extradited back to the U.S.
Okay.
Because a lot of criminals, they go down, since we're a border town, and then a lot of people hear, oh, you go to Mexico just to run away from the law.
It's like the perfect getaway plan for everybody.
But now there's this liaison group, and they call themselves the Gringo Hunters. That's what they're referred to, because that's what they're Gringo Hunters, because, the word. And it's like, they go down to Mexico thinking that they can get away, and they just slip up. Our very first episode, we had this guy named Damian Salinas, who was from Fresno. He committed a crime where he murdered Joshua Tao, and he went from Fresno down to Ensenada, which is just, from San Diego, like 80 miles south, and they were able to track him down and get caught him in Tijuana. And he was like, is this a joke? What are you guys doing? They brought him up to the border. Once he got to the border, he's like, this is not a joke. Yeah. I'm being extradited back to the U.S. Yeah. And in handcuffs, he met the U.S. Border Customs people, and then they took care of it, and now he's awaiting trial.
I mean, that's in the case of like a murder, it seems like a pretty clear case of where extradition would apply. Does the U.S. have good extradition terms with Mexico? I don't know. Is it?
I don't know. It's weird. It's interesting.
Baja California, the relationship with U.S. is very strong. Yeah. Once they get into different areas then it gets a little more complicated.
But I'm thinking like lower level crimes, it might be a little easier to sort of get away with, because you have like if you live in California and you commit like a low level crime that's relative to murder, like a robbery or something, and you slip across the border, it seems like that has to be a pretty common...
You're at the bottom of that radar versus...
Exactly.
Yeah, you're not a high ticket item for that. You're just kind of more at the bottom of the barrel. They're looking more for people that embezzled money or committed murders.
So is that a fairly common stream then of sort of low level offenders fleeing to Mexico? Is that like...
I would assume so, honestly. I would figure there's a lot of people that do, run away and never come back.
Yeah. So back to the trafficking subject, though, is because what I wanted to think about is in terms of the cases that you guys have looked at. I know you talked about the sex trafficking episode that you did. Mm-hmm. Do you feel as though the vigilance in San Diego, given that we're so close to the border, the vigilance from our law enforcement, from our government officials, is there in terms of being on the outlook for this kind of activity, being on the outlook for these kinds of cases? Or is part of the awareness that you're pushing on your show sort of in response to maybe a gap in that vigilance?
I feel like it's definitely not talked about enough. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely something that we feel like is on the agenda, but it's not getting enough push to be preventative. It's more of a reactive where it happens and it'll be on the media for a little bit and everybody will be on lookout, and then like a couple weeks later it washes off and everybody's back to normal.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's just the way our media works, where like it's whatever's in front of your face, that's what you're most worried about, and then the next big thing comes up and it kind of washes away that attention. I
mean, with trafficking, do you think that it doesn't get enough attention because the victims aren't American? Like, that...
Honestly...
I mean, some of them are, but the majority of them are not.
But when you're looking at like I mentioned, Stolen, the Peacock documentary, they mentioned that most of the people trafficked are from the States, from the United States. They're not really from outside. Even though we are a border town, like they're not coming in. They're not trafficked from Mexico. They're trafficked from within the United States.
But I'm curious, who's like the sort of the target population that is getting trafficked?
It's a wide spectrum of young people.
I would imagine, and I can't state this with any certainty, but I would imagine that these tend to be people in probably poor, underserved communities, people who have less connections to family, to community, to school, to
it's also people who get manipulated.
Yeah.
You get as you call it, the term gaslighted, or not gaslighted. What is it? It's like pampering.
Love bombing.
Love bombing. That's the word I'm looking for. Where it's like I'm trying to convince you to be a sex trafficker for me, so I would get you, like, say, an iPhone. I would get you an iPad. I'll get you a car. I'll get you a house. And then next you notice, I need help. It's like, hey, can you help me with this one thing?
Yeah.
And it's something small. And that's where that one thing becomes just something else, becomes something bigger. It's like, I need you to do me a favor.
Sure. But I would agree that people that are in less fortunate situations, maybe like middle class kids that are like missing something, they can lure them with something that they can gift them that they're going to be impressed with. Mm-hmm. Versus people that are a little more higher to middle class and up, they're not really needing anything. Their parents provide everything they need, so they're not If somebody tells them I'm going to buy you an iPad, they probably already have one or two at home and they don't need that one.
Yeah.
So you do pick your targets based on who's easier.
So yeah, it's interesting, and I would love to see more coverage even in your show, because I think that awareness about something like this is really important, because it's, people I feel like we talk about slavery as though it's this thing of the past. And the reality is that there's more slaves in the world now than there have ever been.
Yeah, this is the modern
the
slavery.
terminology changed, but the idea is still
but
there.
I feel like it's not a focal point. Like, it's not the number one talked about issue. And I think it should be up there. And
I agree.
And I do want to point out that San Diego does have a lot of immigrants that aren't here completely legal. And it is hard for you to raise your voice if you don't really have a place and you're afraid of getting in trouble for what your status is. So how do you fight for yourself in that point when you're just trying to
when you're already vulnerable
Yeah.
that way? Yeah. But in terms of just beyond this issue, though, crime more largely, so I sent you some things before we started talking on the air, and Sandag came out with a crime report last month. We're in June now, right? So
yeah,
that'd be May. So Sandag came out with a report in May about San Diego's crime scores. So basically, the overall gist of it is the crime statistics in San Diego from 2021 to 2022 did go down. So good things. So overall crime went down. Violent crime went up, which was interesting. So property crimes, quality of life crimes actually declined in the past year and a half or so. But violent crimes are up and actually higher than the national average. And I'm curious, and I know you guys cover a variety of different crimes. So I'm curious, from just the research you've done and from what you've gathered, do you feel as though is this a surprise to you that I guess the overall crime is down, but that violent crime is up, that we're seeing more murders, more assaults, more crimes of that nature? Is that surprising you, or does that kind of correspond to what you're seeing?
I feel like it corresponds, considering that it's after pandemic and the amount of stress and trauma and mental issues that people went through during pandemic. I can kind of see that it's playing out now.
Yeah.
So to me, it kind of made sense.
To me, it made sense that there was more crime.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a shortage of, police officers and people leaving the state, or, and people coming in. So it does make sense that there is more crime. Is it more do I see it more often? No, I don't feel like I see more crime happening on the streets. But, it is interesting to see that, hey, there is more crime happening in our county a lot.
Yeah. So one of the biggest categories that went up, it looks like, was armed robberies, which I found interesting. One of the things that people have talked about on this show in the past is that we live in a time now in California where the state laws on what constitutes theft, for instance, has actually changed to where now, it has to be above a certain dollar amount to be prosecuted. And I'm blanking. It's 47 or 57. It's one of the propositions. Either you guys help me
Not
out.
sure on the
honestly,
process.
they
it's
changed
one of
so
I know the
much.
dollar amount is
Yeah. One of them has to do with credits for inmates, but the other one has to do. It's basically 47, 57 are very controversial because of the fact that people see it as sort of this wave of soft on crime policies coming from the state that are playing out at the local jurisdictional level. So now, if I go into a store and steal a bag of candy, nothing really happens. I'm not going to get prosecuted for it.
Right.
Versus, you basically have to steal. I think it's above, and don't quote me on this, I think it's above $900 worth of goods to be prosecuted. Okay, it's
Or
above
$999.
Yeah.
Technically.
So the upshot of this is that we're seeing, at least anecdotally, and it seems like now statistically, we're seeing this upsurge in robberies of retail stores, of grocery stores, where people just go in, they take stuff en masse, they walk out. There's videos of it playing out across San Francisco, LA, even San Diego now. And it looks like, if anything, in San Diego, this is sort of emboldening this wave of armed robbery, of crime, of larceny. And I'm curious, you guys are, you host a crime show, you're also residents here. Do you guys feel like people are sort of seeing this lack of safety in public spaces like never before?
I personally haven't.
Yeah.
And I think also because living in North County, it's a lot more different compared to the metropolitan area of San Diego. But like you said, I do see it in videos. I've seen how now in San Francisco, everything's locked up behind a glass case.
Yeah.
Which is really wild to think. I cannot go into a store and buy something or grab something and put it in my cart because of the fear of it being stolen, and you can't, like I have to pay for it first before I even, have my hands on it. Yeah. It's just wild to think. But here I don't see it.
In San Diego.
Yeah.
I don't feel unsafe, but I did work in the retail world where it was very common for like, there was even an age group. It could be someone of any age just coming in and like, I worked at a sunglass store and they would like stuff them in their purse and run out. And again, if it's not under a certain amount, then you really can't do anything, so you just let it go.
Yeah.
And I've heard that recently there has been a spike in that trend where people go to the mall for the sole purpose of like just to steal, and they'll hit stores that they know can't do anything about it.
Well, and I don't know, like I haven't seen the state numbers on whether like theft like that is up across the board, but at least seems like we're seeing more of it now. Like we're seeing it more on social media. We're seeing videos of it happening.
It's not so surprising as it used to be at one
it's
point.
very visible. But it seems like the stats, at least in San Diego, do reflect that there's been at least somewhat of a surge in robbery. But both of you feel like, this hasn't had the same, sort of inverse effect on how safe you feel in public, which is interesting. But I wanted to also talk about some of the other visible crimes that we see in San Diego. One issue that's exploded, again, as we're a border town, this is especially relevant, is the drug crisis and overdoses with fentanyl, with methamphetamine. It just doesn't take a very long walk down the streets of downtown San Diego to see this happening. Unsurprisingly, drug crime was up in the Sandac stats. Is this something you guys explore on the podcast at all? Is this something that, as citizens, that you're thinking about all the time? Like, what sort of are you seeing on the front lines of being involved with your show and just everyday life?
So as a citizen, I do see it. I do hear it. So little backstory. We're getting married, right? And I had my bachelor trip in Phoenix, and as a joke, one of my friends sent me a video of like, hey, like there's this place called Fentanyl Alley in Phoenix, and I'm like, ha ha ha, that's really funny. But deep down inside, you're like, no, that's something serious. Like you have a place that's called like Fentanyl Alley. Like I wonder if there's something like that here in San Diego where it's like, there has to be.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised.
And we haven't reached that point yet because I think it's up and coming, and it's definitely like, okay, it's on our radar to discuss.
We've been like monitoring it as cases come up, but I feel like until we get more research and kind of get more of a grounding on it, it's just not something that we're...
Sure.
Yeah.
And remind me, you guys are in downtown, or you're in...
We're in North County.
North County,
North
yeah.
County.
But, I'm sure you've been downtown. And the fact is like, I've lived in San Diego on and off for the past few years now. And it's certainly always, like, sort of been lurking, but now it just seems like we're living in a time now where it's just inescapable, where people are, shooting up in broad daylight. And San Diego, to be clear, is not seeing the same level of drug crime as San Francisco, as LA, but it's still, it's a border town. It's the focus of, federal officials because of the fact that it's a border town. So kind of tying back into what we're talking about trafficking, like sort of, is it another issue sort of where you feel like, we need more vigilance, more awareness?
Oh, definitely. I feel like there is a decent amount of conversation about it where everybody knows and everybody is alert of it. I first heard it during Halloween season. I was like, oh, this is just like a Halloween notice. But then it continued throughout the year, and I was actually really happy to see that, because it means that like parents are alert, the teenagers are alert, and it is still a constant conversation. So that is a relief. It's just scary to see how quickly it rampaged and how much effect it's done to people at this point, and that it's still pretty early on in that. Yeah,
I think just, like how we try to spare awareness, I think that's what has to happen first.
Yeah.
Be aware that, hey, like during Halloween, check your candy. You always, with our kids, like if you don't talk to your kids what's going on, you're in the dark, and you never know what they could be getting themselves into. It's just really scary. Like I saw a story of a girl who she thought she was taking like a Percocet, but it ended up being fentanyl, and she passed away.
Yeah.
So it's just like, wow, like it can just change in a matter of seconds.
Yeah, it's very rare that it seems like it's someone was really trying to overdose on fentanyl. It seems it's always another drug that's or it's something that's marketed as another drug that ends up being laced with fentanyl, and that seems to be like the common thread in these cases. And I have my news notifications on my phone, like I'm sure many do, and it seems like just barely a day goes by when so and so overdosed, this person overdosed.
Exactly.
Fortunately nobody that directly know has passed away, but definitely people in, second, third degree circles that I know, who have been affected by this. So, I mean, it seems like it's something that's affecting all of us as San Diego County residents. And we can only hope that, again, vigilance and awareness, is part of that, of getting a handle on the problem. So I also, though, wanted to think about, and I know, like, it's interesting because these Standard stats about crime, as I said, crime for population is actually relatively low for a city of our size overall,
Right.
even though violent crime was up. But it seems as though statewide, and San Diego as well, has been affected by crime, by quality of life crimes, and we have a huge unhoused population in San Diego.
I was going to mention
and
that.
it's something that's always on people's minds. Again, just the visibility of the problem has never been worse, in my opinion, at least.
Yes.
And so what I wanted to talk about is just how, as residents, and you have this show, like, sort of, how do you see the relationship between crime and sort of the issue of the unhoused? Because you have to be careful not to conflate the two too much to the point where it's like, because a lot of homeless people don't commit crime. You can't directly correlate the two, but at the same time, there's no denying that certain quality of life crimes are connected with the rise in the unsheltered population. So sort of how you see that, again, from the perspective of both your show and from the standpoint of two people who live in this community.
So I'm really surprised at the fact, like you said, you can't really group them together.
Yeah.
A lot of the cases that I feel like they are a suspect because of like their situation, and then it turns out that they're innocent. And that was actually surprising to me because I, like everybody else, thinks like, oh, well, they're the first subject. Like, they make sense. I do see that it's increasing in San Diego, and it's really sad to like, I was always proud of the fact that like you go to like Seattle or San Francisco, and that is such an issue anywhere you go. It doesn't even matter what area of the city you're in. And I was so proud, like, oh, like San Diego's not that bad. And then now it's like you drive past the freeway and it's like a stream of tents, or literally anywhere you go. It's not even just an area of like around Petco. And it's just, we were talking about this the other day, but I'm like, it's so out of hand that it's just anywhere you look, it's in your face, and it's really hard to get away from.
It's really difficult because, there's people that are homeless because they got out of their houses or their living situation, and they're good people. But then you also have that one bad seed in that group that just makes the whole group look bad. And that's the problem, where you try to find that one person that's responsible, but you put them as everybody puts them as a group. I have friends that work with homeless, people would try to get them for housing, and there's resources out there for everybody, but there's just not enough. And then there's people out there that choose not to accept those resources. Like there's videos I've seen of where in downtown, right during the day, there's someone, shooting up or smoking drugs.
So I was going to see,
and I'm just like, this is insane. I've never seen this happen before in San Diego County.
Yeah.
I feel like that does make you feel very unsafe, where you can't enjoy walking around downtown like you used to.
Yeah.
And that's definitely shifted, I think, a little bit of the culture of San Diego.
Well, I was going to ask you, like, what do you guys think is like sort of the psychological effect of this on, not even people who are directly involved, but just passerbyers, people who are trying to enjoy quality of life in San Diego, that sort of the visibility of these scenes unfolding before us. Like, what does that sort of do to the psychology of our community?
A couple months, like 2 months ago, I went to a Padre game. Yeah. It was late at night, and we ended up parking in the East Village area, and we had to literally walk on the street because the sidewalk was just covered with these encampments. And as you're walking by, like you're stepping and like something like that's sticky on the ground, you're like, oh my gosh, this is really like unsanitary. And then as you're walking by, you also notice like, oh my gosh, like there's people that are playing music and they got like TVs. It's like, wait, like you're homeless, but you have a TV? Like, this is kind of strange.
Paradox,
but in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, let me just get to my car as quickly as I can. I don't want to get mugged. I don't want to get hurt. I just need to get from point A to point B,
So let me go to the game.
Yeah, exactly. And it's as a resident, you're like, okay, like this is unsafe. And if I was a tourist, oh my gosh, like how can someone be safe in this community like this? Yeah. Like it's very it's scary. It's very terrifying.
Hey there, San Diego. If you're on the hunt for a way to enhance your health, I have a great recommendation for you. Dorado Nutrition is a company that's all about helping people live their best lives through top-notch American-made supplements. Their expert team has crafted products to support a variety of health needs, from weight management to muscle building and more. And with ingredients like Vidosia agrestis and Tongkat Ali, praised by a well-known neurobiologist seen on the Joe Rogan podcast, These supplements could be just what you need to reach your health goals. And for a limited time, you can get 25% off your purchase by using promo code SD2023 at checkout. So if you're looking for a way to improve your health, Dorado Nutrition might just be the solution you need.
It's also had an impact on all the small businesses in downtown because
Sure.
you don't, I mean, I know for myself, like I used to go to brunch every other Sunday in downtown and just like enjoy the day. I probably haven't done that in a couple months now for the same reason.
Sure.
Like the last time I went, I was like, oh, this gets a little sketchy. And if you're drinking and you just don't feel comfortable like walking through a street and like ending up in a bad situation, so I just don't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, for you, the awareness has to be heightened because of the fact that you do a podcast on crime and cases where people go missing and stuff happens. I was going to ask you, though, like when we talk about the homeless population, I think you can't like disassociate that from, the fact that a lot of these people face real issues of, substance addiction and real issues of mental illness. On your show, is that a theme that's ever come up in terms of, the mental illness factor, the substance abuse, and how that sort of leads into different areas of crime? Is that something you guys have covered at all?
We've gone up and down the spectrum of it. Like there's cases, it all depends on what we're actually researching, but there's been a couple where, off the top of my head, there's this one that we did, Susan Eubanks, who she's on death row in California where she killed her 3 sons in her own home, and she essentially kind of blamed it on her ex-husband, and but she also was using substances. Like she had a huge amount of like medications in her house when they arrested her, and it was just like, okay, there's prescription abuse there, and it's like there's that particular case that comes off the top of my head. I'm like, okay, like there's
and
that.
that's like a relatively recent case, or was that like
no? This was back like in the mid '90s.
Okay,
but it happened in San Marcos.
San Marcos.
Right. Yeah, right. San Marcos before Cal State San Marcos was being developed. It was in that area right there, and you're just like, wow, like substance abuse with prescriptions. Like, wow, that's insane.
We still try to humanize them as much as we can, but I do feel it is case by case. Where some of them you can see that someone did it either like I said, like spitefully, they planned it, they took the effort to do it, versus other people that they were in an altered state of mind and then they just did something that they probably wouldn't have normally done.
Crime of passion.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, so there's the substance abuse issue, and then there's also, it seems like an explosion of mental illness on our streets, which there's some argument there that it's correlated with the substance abuse issue. But, you kind of look at things from as you said, the psychological perspective.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk about a few of these psychological cases and whether mental illness was a factor in any of them at all.
Well, I do look at like the generational trauma side.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. The only one that comes up is Ditmar. So there's one case of a man who cooked his wife, and it's debatable whether she passed away and then he did it as like a ceremonial thing, or if he killed her and then cooked her. Yeah. It was just kind of it was just very unknown. Like by the time they got there, it was just too many loose ends. But they were up in their 70s. They lived alone, no children. And
it was San Diego.
This was in Oceanside.
This was in downtown Oceanside.
Jeez.
Yeah. So it was one of those where like we published that episode and people were like, I went to the store where he worked at. Like I remember him helping me. I remember going there and like seeing him, and like saying hi when I was shopping. And I'm like, yeah. And then he, like one day to the next. And it's one of those where like it's really hard to tell whether it was in the moment or whether it was something that like, again, pre-planned.
Yeah. What do you think you cover a lot of these, murder cases. So like what do you think you guys get more of? Is it more often that it was, a crime of passion, somebody was in an altered state of mind or did something out of a spur of emotion, or do these cases tend to be more premeditated, like methodically carried out?
I want to say like majority of them, I feel like they're
Crime of passion.
Crime of passion.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if you remember, this happened back in 2021 in October. Ali Abulaban.
Yeah.
He was a TikTok star. I remember pre-pandemic, I followed him on Instagram. I was like, what he did is he liked to do voiceovers of Scarface. And he moved here to San Diego from Virginia, and he ended up, having separation with his wife, and his wife was moving on, and he found out by tampering with his daughter's iPad with a recording device, or either like a communicate, kind of like Alexa, like you can hear it through a mic. And he found out that there was someone at the house. He got really angry. He drove up to the house, to the sky high apartment in downtown, and he just shot them.
Yeah.
And it was just like, that's clearly premeditated, and it's just more out of the passion. And it's just like, wow, like, okay, like, so he was enraged, and that's how he committed that murder.
But
like,
in that one, there's also the argument that because he was doing so many impersonations, that he started to blur his character from Scarface and kind of like became one identity. So it's also that social media aspect of like, how much are you taking in, and do you know how to like balance the two and separate that from your real life, or are you believing that what you post on social media is your reality?
Is who you are, yeah.
And you start to, again, go into a different state of mind and develop a different mental illness where you're just kind of bipolar at that point.
Yeah, well, on that note, I wanted to ask you, I mean, social media, it seems as though, as someone who has social media, that crime is becoming more glamorized on social media. It's becoming more, there's people posting, videos of their crimes, people, Snapchatting or Facebook Living their crimes or murders or suicides, like these sorts of, this sort of glamorization and publicization of crime that's never really been there before. And is that something that you guys have covered? Is this something that you're seeing in terms of, people either using social media to amplify the effect of their crime, or inversely, social media actually sort of being the driving force behind crime itself?
I think that one is a driving force, and part of it is because we're not as sensitized to it, because you are able to see it so much that you're not as shocked when you hear about a murder, because there's certain postings now where they don't even have the warning of like graphic content, and it's just available for everybody to see.
Yeah.
And there's other ones that do still have it, and it's surprising to me that it's just so easy to like scroll through and you just keep scrolling and like it doesn't stop your day. When before it would be something that you would see it and like almost have to look away and like wonder how it even got there in the first place.
Well, it's like we're inundated by this content now.
It's everywhere.
Like one thing that pops up is the sideshows, like where people, they block up an intersection and they just burn out their cars, where these cars are they're doing donuts in the street, and then one of the cars gets too close and ends up taking out a couple people. Instead of kind of stopping, everybody focuses on whoever got hurt or hit, and it's just like you just see their phones just up to that person. Like there's like no respect. Like there's just like So clearly, social media is like a driving force for some people to be like, hey, look, I committed this crime. Like, look what I did, or even just like, look what I'm doing.
Kind of passerby effect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But in some cases, it also helps solve it because they're documenting every step of what they're doing, not considering that like this is going to be evidence at one point. They kind of build their own case, and then it shoots you in the foot, and you're kind of glad that social media is there in that way.
Sure.
Because they weren't that smart about their crimes.
Yeah.
But it's a double sword.
Yeah.
Double-edged
I mean,
sword.
seems like there's a certain level of arrogance to that kind of criminal activity where people, want to say, like, look what I did. Like, I did this. I'm responsible. It's sort of I guess, like, in a different time, people would sort of leave a calling card behind, but now it's like, you just whip out your phone and there it is.
Yeah, but it's not executed in the sense of like, oh, this is my trademark. It's just someone not thinking in the moment and feeling proud of what they just did, or like living off that adrenaline almost. Like you've seen some where like criminals will like Snapchat right after they do it, and they'll like post a video and not realizing like they're still at the scene of the crime. You can see things behind you, like you're recording your own evidence, and then like you're surprised at like the fact that it's not gone in 24 hours and that somebody was able to like record it or screenshot or somehow it was able to be saved.
Well, so far we've been talking about pretty much solved crime. But you guys cover some unsolved crimes too.
We do.
You cover cases where we don't really know, exactly, what led to a person's demise or disappearance. Are there any unsolved cases, whether serial killer or what have you, just disappearance, mysterious cases that sort of come to mind and that you guys have covered recently?
I think the biggest one that's shocked all of San Diego, and it's not even just South Bay in general, but like the entire county, is the Maya Millette, the mom from Chula Vista who had 3 kids. And the trial starts in August where her husband's on trial for her murder, but there still hasn't been a body. So it's still very up in the air as far as like, there is circumstantial evidence and there's a good amount of it, but there's always that one hesitation of like, well, there's no body yet. So there's still that question mark of like,
what do you do?
Possibility of is she still out there living her life, which I know most people would agree that's not the case. But as far as a courtroom, how is that going to weigh in? And how is his lawyers going to play to that? And I think that case, we've had so many people reach out. We actually did a day-by-day coverage of the preliminary trial. And we got so many listeners that were thankful for not having to sit there for 8 hours and listen to the entire court. And to just be able to keep up to date with what's going on, because a lot of people identify with her as like a mom, as someone that's involved, part of the community. She had a great job. She was trying to become independent and build her own identity. And like after a 20-year marriage, she wanted to find herself again. And a lot of people can identify with that. And I think that her case is going to be one that is going to still keep everybody up at night until we finally get some answers.
Exactly.
Sure. Any cases stand out to you, Adrian?
One that we recently did, which was really interesting, I knew about it, was the Geezer Bandit here in San Diego, where, he robbed banks of an amount, like who knows how many, how much amount, right? But he did it 13 times total from San Diego up to Temecula, up to Santa Barbara. And then, he stopped after he almost got caught. But through our research, we found out that it had been 5 years since his last robbery, and federally they could not prosecute him anymore. And I was like, oh wow. So like, if I rob a bank today and 5 years from now, like I cannot be charged by the government. In California, you have 6 years, okay. So you have 1 extra year. But it's like, okay, like this is one of those cases where they still haven't been able to find or identify whoever that Geezer Bandit was.
So if he took off his geezer mask today, we couldn't do anything about it. He's a free man.
No, he's a free man. Or a free person. We don't know if it's a man or a woman.
Yeah, that's true. It could be one,
but it's like, wow, this guy got away with it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But there is a handful of unsolved cases in San Diego County.
Yeah. I mean, do you guys we've talked about sort of finding, themes or patterns in crime, but the reality is, as we talked about, each case is different and each person's different, each person's motivations are different. Again, Angie, you look at the, sort of a lot of the psychological aspects of this. In the course of doing this podcast and, just living life, like what do you feel like you've discovered about maybe some surprising lessons about human nature when it comes to criminal motivations and criminal activity? Anything stand out to you?
I think my lack of people seeing something and not saying anything. There's so many times where something happens and everybody around had the statement of like, I had a feeling, or like this didn't seem right, or for the like I noticed certain patterns, but they didn't speak up at all. And then it happens and they're like, oh, I'm so sorry that this happened, but you had a chance to say something and you never did. And I feel like there's a little bit of like, I don't know if it's social anxiety or like a certain stigma between like getting into people's business. But if you see something, I definitely feel like it's worth at least mentioning. Like there's a way to say things and there's a way to raise concern. But like, at least for me, if I were to see a child or anybody in a certain situation, I don't think I would be able to just note it and not take action. Yeah. Especially knowing how much I've covered and how far it can go.
Well, yeah, the domestic violence and the trafficking cases that you guys are talking about, I mean, that seems like where that's especially front and center is like, if you see something, say something.
Yeah.
And like it's so important to be able to recognize the signs of, whether it's an abusive relationship, abusive situation, abusive parent, abusive this, or with trafficking, there's certain warning signs.
Well, even children that have attitude. I mean, I know it's normal for teenagers to have attitude, but like the Brenda Spencer, the shooting, that one where like once it happened, everybody's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like she had something off about her. Yeah. And I'm like, but nobody thought to like her teachers were even like, oh, she kind of scared me, so I didn't really talk to her. Like you were in a position where you could have been able to like talk to her and maybe stop that from happening.
Sure. Yeah. Well, as I said, living in an era of, and the last episode we did was on mass shootings and gun violence prevention. And it seems like we're living in a time now where, it's like every time that one of these things happens, it's like, we knew that this person was
the signs were there.
Shady, the signs were there. And then it's like, well, how was this person able to get a gun, in my opinion? And then B, it's like, where was the person who stepped in and, said something, did something, made a difference? And it does happen. But, it seems as though, kind of back to what we're talking about social media, there's this, like, bystander effect we're living in, where people kind of know what's right, see what's unfolding, but just kind of
But that's what confuses me. On social media, people are so easy to vocalize their opinions and to get almost controversial and like into like argumentative spectrums where it almost becomes cyberbullying. But then in person, you can't speak your mind to someone that's in your circle or that you have direct access to.
Yeah.
And that's where it's almost confusing to where I don't understand people.
What about you, Adrian, in terms of sort of just the human psychology and sort of human motivation for crime? Like, what are some of the things that you've sort of ascertained during your time doing the show and the podcast about?
So, like, the one thing I've always, like, the one thing I've picked up the most from doing our podcast is I've always seen these headlines, like murder here, kidnapping here, right? And I've never, like, deep dove into, like, the backstory of the person, like the victim. Like, I think, like, for me, like, that's the one thing that stands out to me the most, where, like, okay, like, yes, the perpetrator did this, but then you never look at what the victim, you know, like, say, for instance, Chelsea King, like, no one knew who Chelsea King was. And then you start realizing, like, she liked running. She, you know, she was a good student. And, you know, after that, then they became to, like, Chelsea's Light, Chelsea's Law. So something tragic happened, but a positive thing came out of it, you know. And on all the cases that we've done, I've looked and tried to see, like, okay, who was this person, you know. And I never looked at it that way. Every time I saw the news, I was like, oh my gosh, someone else died. How sad. Yeah. But then you look and be like, oh, look, like say, for instance, Maya. She was a mom. She was becoming independent. You know, she was going through a divorce and she was trying to be something better for herself, but also for her children. And it's like, you know, so it's something very touching.
Yeah. And you watch videos of her, like, riding her Jeep with her kids. And it's so like, it just humanizes her to see that, like, she had an average life and she was just enjoying herself. And it kind of almost angers you more that something like this happened to her, because that could literally be anybody in your circle or even yourself.
Sure. Wow. Do you, I mean, in terms of, like, this focus on, we talked about at the beginning, so I don't want to be a dead horse, but, you know, there's so much focus, seems like, nowadays on the perpetrator, on, you know, the criminal. I mean, for instance, you know, Ted Kaczynski, Unabomber, recently, you know, hanged himself. And
we also have Jeffrey. You have all these Netflix shows.
Yeah, we had a whole Netflix show on him. We had a Netflix show on Jeffrey Dahmer. So it's like, I mean, again, you know, there are compelling stories here, but it seems as though, you know, this almost glorification of the perpetrator is something that's just being amplified over time. And so I just find it really unique that you guys are kind of pushing back and saying, no, you know, this is the victim's story. You know, this is the person who suffered, but they were defined by a lot more than this. You know, they had a life, they had people who cared about them, they had passions, they had hobbies. I just think that's particularly unique, but we need more of that. We need more of that for sure.
No, definitely. And, you know, we listen to our DMs, we listen to our messages, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like, I knew about Chelsea, I knew about Amber, but I did not know that with Amber's situation, the day that she went missing, she was excited to go to school because she was going to get her goat. Because she went to Escondido High, but they do a lot of agricultural stuff where, you know, it's it was the winter, it was January, and, you know, they participate into the fair, the San Diego County Fair, where they take their cattle, their sheep, their whatever that they're going to do to raise it and then present it at the fair. That's what she was doing. And it's like, I had no idea. Like, I knew who she was when she went missing, but I had no idea that the day she went missing, she was excited to go to school because she was going to get her goat. And she never came home that day. And then here we are.
Yeah. So
you know, a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think so often it's just these statistics and these casualty lists. It's like, let's humanize these people. Let's talk about who they were, what they meant.
Celebrate them.
Yeah. And you guys, I mean, you guys are in San Diego, and, you know, we're in the world of crime in San Diego. You know, you try to keep it community focused, you know, try to keep it locally focused. So I'm curious to know, as we close, just sort of overall, I mean, we talked about crime stats. We talked about, you know, some crime is up, some crime is down. But when it comes to, like, our community and the community of San Diego, the greater San Diego area, you know, what are you guys seeing, just to, like, leave on an optimistic note? Like, what are you guys seeing that's, like, optimistic or positive in some of these stories that, you know, you can sort of take away? And, you know, because we focus a lot on the negativity. We focus a lot on, you know, the fact that, you know, there's all these different motivations for crime. But what are some of sort of the positive trends or some of the positive examples that you see in your coverage that you can sort of take away into everyday life?
I think with the Maya case and going forward, like most recent cases in San Diego, you can definitely see more community involvement. You see more of like the search and rescue and how more groups were literally coming from all different areas of San Diego to go out hiking. And instead of taking their Saturday to like go down to the beach, they were going out to like desert areas to go look for her. And this continued for months and months, I think up until recent, or they might still be doing it. But the amount of people that were turning up to these events and that were posting and sharing and keeping her story alive and her poster, like, it just showed me how strong this community is and how strong this city is and this county. And it definitely inspires hope that, you know, there's still that humanity factor. I think it's even stronger post-pandemic where you miss that human interactions and now people are knowing to like, okay, I didn't have this for so long. I want to come back and like be a part of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what I like to do is sometimes we'll get messages of, you know, hey, there's this missing person, you know, and we'll share it, right? And I think there's a lot of that going on, you know, on social media where someone may be missing and it's like, oh my gosh, like let's share who this person is, and it's like let's get it out there so people can be aware, and it's like that community awareness. I'm seeing a lot of that on social media, and yeah, like people do, you know, their own way of participating, either being in public or on social media. And it's like, okay, like I'm happy that people do help out that way.
The effort's coming forward. And we've had a couple where like we post the missing poster and then like, you know, within a couple hours, like, oh, they've been found. And it's like, oh, phew.
Yeah.
And I think that that's possible because of the amount of people that are participating.
Yeah. So it's a double-edged sword. There's like, we've talked a lot about the negatives of social media, you know, as sort of an opportunity to glorify, amplify crime, but also a way to bring people together, also a way to bring community together, also a way to help solve some of these cases even. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that's worth recognizing too.
Like the 100%. Term active listener is becoming much more popular in like true crime specifically, but I think most podcasts where you don't just listen to the podcast for the content, but like you find, okay, what can I do to be a part of it? How can I support? How can I like integrate this into my life and do something to kind of like keep pushing this goal forward? And I think that awareness is definitely paying off.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of makes it worth keep going.
Sure.
Yeah. And like on another note, with our episodes, what we do at the very end is we do our small business shout-outs. So what Angie and I, like, we're San Diegans through. She's from South Bay, I'm from North County. We met in the middle, and it's like, okay, like this city is amazing. There's so much to find in the city, but there's so many small businesses that need our help that we like to support. And that's what we do. We go to a little mom and pop shop, whether it be somewhere where we can sit down and eat, little coffee shop, or even get a haircut, nails done, or either like say something you need for whatever you need to do, right? And we support them. We feature them on our episodes. We put their social medias on our social medias and our Buzzsprout account. And it's just like, that's one way we can be like, okay, you know what? Let's incorporate our county more into our platform.
Yeah. And on that note, I did want to, as we end, I wanted to give you guys just a quick chance for people who this is your first time hearing about you, like, you know, give people a chance to know like how they can find you, how they can find the show. You guys are active on social media, so
Yes.
I don't know who wants to take that one, but
we're pretty much everywhere, or we try to be as much as we can.
Yeah.
We're on Instagram at Where in the World is Crime in San Diego, Where in the World is Crime in SG. We're on YouTube. Where in the World is Crime in San Diego. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google,
Amazon
Podcasts, or Amazon Music technically.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
We're on. You type in "Where in the World is Crime in San Diego" on your podcast platform, and you'll find us.
You can Google us, and all our platforms will come up as well, as well as our email. So we're always there.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully the people listening to this episode will enter that in their search bar right now and listen to it on your way home after this episode or wherever you're going. But in any case, thanks so much for both of you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having us.
Appreciate your time. And next time, let's make it a special edition maybe if you have a cool case you want to bring up or something in particular, maybe an unsolved crime, we can come back and do
totally.
round
yeah,
I agree.
There's no shortage of crime in San Diego, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately not. All right. Thanks so much. Guys, that's a wrap. This has been another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks again to our sponsors, MaxLux Media at maxluxmedia.com and Dorado Nutrition at doradonutrition.com. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning into the show. See you next time. Stay classy, San Diego.